Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Jessica Ann Mitchell Iwu, your founder of the National Black Cultural Information Trust. I'm here today joined by Dreesen Heath, researcher and reparations expert, as well as Dave Ragland, co-director and co-founder of the Truth Telling Project. Today, we are here for Slavery is Not an Ethnicity, Proposed Changes to U.S. Race and Ethnicity Categories Emergency Session. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Okay, why we're here. The U.S. Office of Management and Budget is currently working to update race and ethnicity standards and guidelines. This review process is standard and intends to maximize accuracy and comparability of race and ethnicity across federal data sets. We know this review process impacts many communities across the US, and we are seeking to address a major and specific issue that impacts the Black community, but hope you apprise yourself of the other proposed changes. So why we're here continued. Some special interest groups are pushing to have the terms descendants of slavery, descendants of slaves, American freedmen, or foundational Black Americans replace the current race category for Black or African American, or establish a separate ethnicity category for all federal data collection, including on the US Census. These types of changes will cause great confusion and have a devastating effect on the accuracy of data collection concerning Black communities. Confusion surrounding how to identify Black Americans or African Americans will potentially lead to further undercounting, resulting in fewer resources for Black communities across the United States. Black people have long been considered a hard to count population and are miscounted in the US Census for varying reasons. We should not add another reason to that list. Additionally, while descendants of slaves or slavery may be terms used or exchanged in some reparations conversations, using slavery as an official government race or ethnic description for Black Americans or African Americans is dehumanizing. Our ancestors were enslaved, but slavery was not their ethnicity, and thus it should not be ours. So the WHO. The governmental entity in charge of this is the Office of Management and Budget's Interagency Technical Working Group on Race and Ethnicity Standards. So I'm going to pause here and let one of our other panelists discuss this section.
You named, this is OMB's process. It's a standard process of the Office of Management and Budget, which established a working group to assess these race and ethnicity standards in 1997 and takes a periodic review of these statistical standards, which apply to most federal data collection. In 2022, the OMB convened this particular interagency technical working group on race and ethnicity standards to apply changes that are necessary as the population grows and as there's other considerations for needs for specific communities. And so this OMB process, this working group is charged to discover and provide recommendations for minimum reporting categories and how they should be changed or not changed to detail accurately race and ethnicity groups. They are also supposed to provide recommendations around the question format, terminology, and wording of questions, as well as the instructions. As you know, some of the barriers to filling out these forms, include mistrust of government, include not having a clear understanding of the instructions of filling out the form in the first place. And so this working group is supposed to interrogate what changes need to be necessary to make that more accessible. They look at things such as terminology, which we're seeing in this proposed changes for this the working group currently is looking at terminology such as, taking off the mention of Negro, which is still in the definition of Black or African American in the race category, although it was excised from the race category in the last census. So I'll talk about that a little further, but just wanted to give you an example around terminology. They're also, supposed to make recommendations for collection and reporting and how that can be improved when self-identification is not possible. I want to lift up the fact that, the census is always one of our major processes, and there's always mobilization to get activity for the census, participation for the census, which we need that increased activity for in order to be accurately counted and resources to be allocated. But these federal data collection standards also apply to other basic day-to-day surveys, such as the American Community Survey, the American Housing Survey, the Housing Vacancy Survey. You can, when you fill out a form for schooling for your children or community members, these are the types of categories that will be displayed. We're talking about mortgage lending applications as well as medical research. So how they were able to determine, the gaps and the disproportionate impact on the COVID-19 pandemic is through this federal data collection. And so I just wanted to lift up that this is not just a census issue. This is a broader federal data collection issue and affects your day-to-day social services and allocation to allocation of funding for those services. According to the legal mandate of the OMB, the standards should establish or update concepts and definitions that have a broad public acceptance and understanding. That's very important. That is written in their legal mandate. There needs to be a broad understanding and application and acceptance of the various terms. They need to address general societal needs. They're not supposed to be specified for a specific program. It is for general societal needs, such as social services, not specialized programs, such as reparations programs, and that there needs to be more meaningful and useful use of this aggregation. And so, as has been stated, this data is used explicitly over many different federal programs to provide community planning resources and basic social services. And while we're here, grounded in 2023, it's also important to see how we got here with the census and how Black people have been counted and displayed or not counted on the census. The last time the Black community was identified by their enslavement, they were barely counted or identified on the census. You were a tally mark under a slave holding household, a white household, and nameless. In the first 1790 census and decades after, you had three categories: free whites, all other persons, and slaves. Slaves were not even, enslaved Black people were not even put on the census. They had a separate slave schedule for people to be counted. And so these things are important when even after 1870, you have an undercount of the newly freed Black population. And that undercounting continues today for varying reasons. Just in the 2010 census, as I was alluding to earlier around terminology, they still had as your race category, Black or African American or Negro to be chosen on that census. That's the 2010 census. The 2020 census was the first census where there was Black or African American as a race group. And it took decades and centuries of to get that proposed change in this process. And so just want to uplift where we've been to contextualize the moment that we're in right now when thinking about the importance of these guidelines. And I can lift up, as we've been saying, why is this even important, right? Accuracy of results, the accurate counting of people, thus leading to federal funding and allocation of resources. And I just want to throw, some numbers out there, if you don't mind, just to contextualize what this impact actually looks like, right? We're talking about the federal government relying, solely on the 2020 census data to distribute approximately $1.5 trillion across 316 federal programs. That includes Head Start programs, that includes Medicaid, Medicare, highway construction grants. And that also means that if there's an undercount in these particular congressional districts, which are used to, determine your representation in government, that there is there will be roughly an undercount that's equivalent to a loss of 3 members of the House of Representatives as a result of this undercount. And so to underscore, we have a hard to count population that could be further undercounted if we do not take these review processes seriously. Black communities are already disinvested in purposely, and we do not want to add another layer of disinvestment and division to allow lesser resources to Black communities.
Thank you, Dreesen. I'm going to go a little bit into some of the issues also with using slavery as an ethnic descriptor. Slavery as an ethnic descriptor is a continued harm derived from chattel slavery. First of all, slavery itself, forced enslavement and servitude, is not an ethnic identity. It's a condition that was forced upon our ancestors in spite of their ethnic identity. And to create an identity surrounding, or an ethnic identity surrounding their enslavement goes right back to the point where Africans were enslaved, and that was codified, and they were put into permanent servitude just off the basis of being people of African descent. So creating or forcing this as a part of our ethnic descriptor is a continuation of that dehumanization that our ancestors experienced. One of the original harms of chattel slavery was an attack on the peoplehood of our ancestors. And so we don't want to continue that process. We also don't want to aid in the further separation of communities of African descent and our shared histories. We don't want to aid in further ethnic erasure by describing Black Americans as descendants of slaves, not in the purpose of for reparations specifically, but for the purpose of naming us as an ethnic group. That is a tantamount to our own ethnic erasure. We can acknowledge, honor, and know the impact of learning from the atrocities of our ancestors, and understand what our communities have gone through in the past and present, but we are not defined by those atrocities. Those atrocities and crimes done to our ancestors are not who we are. They're actually what we fought against and what our ancestors fought against. Additional issues with using slavery as an ethnic descriptor for Black Americans specifically, it's actually not that specific to us. U.S. chattel slavery It actually has an international impact. People often forget about the intra-American slave trade in New York City's serving as the international hub for the illegal slave trade. So we actually have people that are descendants of Africans that were enslaved in the United States that have different national origins. There are diasporic descendants of enslaved Africans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States, but they may be a Bayesian American, a Trinidadian American, or Jamaican American. So it's actually not that specific to us, along with it also not slavery itself not being an ethnicity. So we advise keeping the Black or African American racial category as listed, continuing to allow for self-identification of ethnicity or national origins. A lot of people that are asking for the various Black ethnic groups to be listed separately, there is already a self-identification box for people to list their various national origins and ethnicities. Is directly under the section for Black or African American, and you can write in and self-identify. So if you want to say African American, you can write that in. If you want to say Jamaican American, you can write that in. If you want to say Nigerian American, you can write that in. That actually already occurred on the 2020 census. We also advise if ethnicities or national origins are listed similar to the Asian category listings, you could use Black or African American US national origin to describe Black Americans. So some of our primary concerns that Dreesen uplifted before, if we get into this renaming, redefining, taking us really far off the terms that the majority of the Black American community use, which are either Black American or African American, we will have confusion and undercounting of Black communities and less access to resources and funding, as Dreesen laid out earlier. So I will let one of our other panelists go into this section unless you want me to.
Sure, I could. Uplifting and going into detail again around these primary concerns are, Black communities are continually undercounted within these federal data collection surveys. And this is for varying reasons. This is because, we don't participate. This is because of mistrust in government. It's because of lack of accessibility. But there's also, being able to actually get to the form and know what you're doing with the form and how it's impacting your day-to-day life. The OMB is tasked with using these universally accepted terms, so cutting down on various modes of confusion or lesser broader acceptance. This meets the minimum standards that will accurately count the growing population. In terms of, again, just emphasizing this lack of this direct correlation to lesser resources for Black communities. There is various research already done around the confusion surrounding different terms. Those data sets, could be larger in terms of surveying the community, but there are two terms that are generally accepted, and those have proven to be Black American and African American. There is, importance of knowing history as present day and how those present day impacts continue to affect us, and there are broader cultural issues that continue to impact Black communities in the US today. And so keeping that in mind, those are continued concerns with this process that need to be uplifted both through the comment process, right, where we're running up on a deadline of next week, Wednesday, April 12th, but also following that deadline, because they will not come to their final conclusions on the OMB process until summer of 2024.
Dreesen spoke to this earlier about, and this is an excerpt from the National Urban League, speaking about the undercount of Black Americans in every census since 1790, and the $1.5 trillion that would be distributed and could be lost for that could go to federal programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, et cetera, and also affecting political representation, as Dreesen stated earlier. So we don't want to do anything that's going to have a devastating impact on our communities if it's not worth it, if it doesn't have a specific need. And at this time, there is no specific need to rename or redefine African Americans at this time, especially if it's going to harm the actual resources that goes to our communities. So I'm also sharing here a copy of the 2020 census, just so people can see what it looked like. And as you can see, as I stated earlier, it has Black or African American, and then it has that place for people to self-identify. The current proposed changes on the that is on the grayscale document also shows Black or African American, but it also has boxes that people can check off to self-identify, and another box to write in if your of what you identify as is not listed there before. I also want to uplift that the interagency for technical working group on race and ethnicity standards has governing principles. So part of their governing principles is to consider useful data aggregations. Foremost consideration should be given to data aggregations by race and ethnicity that are useful for statistical analysis, program administration and assessment, and enforcement of existing laws and judicial decisions, bearing in mind that standards are not intended to be used to establish eligibility for participation in any federal program. What certain special interest groups are telling people is that we have to get our name changed on the census so that people will know who's eligible for reparations. But according to the governing principles, even if you were to change the name on the census, which would cause an undercounting, it still would not establish any eligibility for participation in any federal program, which would include if there existed a federal reparations program, which we don't even have at this moment. So all of this kind of going in circles about we need to have our name changed for eligibility for reparations is not accurate. It is not true. This would not establish eligibility for participation in federal reparations program. Another part of the governing principles is clear concepts and terminology. To the extent practicable, the concepts and terminology should reflect clear and generally understood definitions that can achieve broad public acceptance. As of to this date, the top two terms that Black Americans refer to ourselves as, and this is according to extensive research, is Black American or African American. Those are the broadly, publicly acceptable terms, and we should not start causing confusion within our communities. And additionally, the category changes are based on sound research, Any changes in the categories should be based on sound methodological research, should include evaluations of the impact of any changes, not only on the usefulness of the resulting data, but also on the comparability of any new categories with the existing ones. None of that type of research has been done with the names people are throwing out here to rename Black Americans. No sound methodological research has been done. No evaluations of the impact on our communities have been done. No comparability of the new categories with the old categories has been done. So the impact that could be potentially devastating on our communities is not being considered when people are trying to throw out these various terms and names that are not broadly accepted and will cause a number of different issues in the near future if they were to be implemented. So again, we suggest keeping the Black racial category as listed, continuing to allow for self-identification of ethnicity or national origins. If ethnicities or national origins are listed similar to Asian category listings, use Black or African American to describe Black Americans. So here's what you can do. And I want to say thank you to all of the people that are joining us today. There's a lot that you can do. But first, the number one thing is you can submit a public comment to the Office of Management and Budget. We have a draft public comment available right now at nbcit.org/OMB. We just held a town hall on Tuesday. So if you're here today, you're attending our Thursday town hall. So thank you for doing that. But you can go to nbcit.org/OMB to see the draft public comment that's available. And what we're gonna do next is I'm gonna do a step-by-step guide to submitting your public comment. I'm gonna have to stop sharing this screen and go to a different screen. We'll also open up Q&A so that some of your questions can be answered while I'm setting up the preview to submitting public comment. So just give me a second to switch over.
Wanted to emphasize something that Jessica spoke to earlier around this not being the process for which establishes eligibility for any special programming outside of regular social services. I just want to put a pin in that point because an entire new law is necessary to provide that designation. That does not come from this data collection process. And so any narratives around further disaggregation is needed for reparations eligibility is completely false. This does not apply to this process. As you saw in California, there was a requirement for an entire other law to deal with specific eligibility around the reparations programming potentially. And so I just want to, start. We are here to present the facts of this situation and how it will have clear impacts on communities.
Thank you, Dreesen. I am now going to share my screen so that everyone can see the page that has the instructions. Again, that page is nbcit.org/OMB. So the page that you should see in front of you is OMB Race and Ethnicity Draft Public Comment for African Americans. It has two links that you can use to submit public comment. One of them doesn't always work well, so that's why I included two links. For people that are joining us live, I put the first link in the chat. Please, in your comment, in the section where you're actually going to put your comment in that box, don't put anything personally identifiable like your address or your phone number unless you don't mind it being shared with the world, because it will be publicly available. So don't put that in the box where your comment goes, but they will ask for like your name and other information, but that will not be public in the other section. So in the actual comment box section, don't put your private information because it will be made public. And here is the sample comment to the Interagency Technical Working Group on Race and Ethnicity Standards at the Office of Management and Budget. I oppose changing the name, description, and definition of the race category Black or African American for federal data collection, including for the US Census. Accurately documenting the Black American population is of the highest priority. Our names and identifiers have historical precedence and value, and changing that will cause confusion and harm the accuracy of results. Additionally, I do not support adding the terms slavery, slaves, freedmen, or foundational to the name and description of Black Americans. Consideration of such identification categories as American freedmen or American descendant of slavery will completely undermine accurate federal resource and funding allocation to programs and initiatives that aim to benefit Black communities. These are not universally accepted or used terms for present-day Black Americans. Though our ancestors endured slavery, slavery is not our ethnicity, and it is dehumanizing and inaccurate to make slavery or slaves a race category or ethnic identifier. To accurately determine community needs and understand existing socioeconomic impacts, selecting Black or African American US national origin is sufficient and is less likely to cause confusion or other issues. Thank you for your time and consideration of this important issue. Now, this is a sample comment. You can take it as is and copy and paste it in, or you can add to it. You can add your own information to it. You can add your own thoughts to it. You don't have to take this word for word. So what I'm just gonna do here is copy the text, and I'm gonna go over to the regulations.gov link. Can everyone see that? Okay, so the section with the red star, you can just paste that comment in there. And like I said, you can add anything you want to it. You can submit your comment as an individual or as an organization. And if you were to do that, maybe your organization wants to add additional educational information, you could attach file. But generally, if you just want to submit a regular public comment, you do not need to do all of that. You can submit with your email address. I'll just choose one of mine. And then you can tell us about yourself. You're an individual. I selected individual. Type in your name there. You don't have to put in your city, state, address, or phone number, but your name, your first and last name is necessary. And then you submit, I am not a robot. So I'm just gonna do these steps.
There's a question in the chat. How many times can you submit a comment?
I'm pretty sure you can submit a public comment any amount of times that you want. I'm not sure that bombarding them would make a difference. Like if you were to submit 5, I'm not sure if that would make a difference as if your comment is the same. But I don't think there's a limitation on the amount of public comments that you can submit. But if I'm wrong, panelists, feel free to correct me.
That question, and I don't believe that it will prevent you from doing so, but there is, within the Federal Registrar's document about this process, there is an email if you have questions further about the process. And I'm pasting that in the chat.
And I also just wanted to reiterate that we're answering questions directly about this process.
Thank you. So they have the CAPTCHA here that you can select, I am not a robot, and then you hit this button, the blue button at the bottom that says submit public comment. And then they're going to give you a special number, And that number is going to be your public comment number, and it'll also be emailed directly to you. So once you complete your submission, it will go through a very short review process, and then it will be posted publicly, and it will be a part of the historical record.
Again, we're addressing this specific issue, which does have grave impacts. We know that the OMB is looking at other proposed changes. And so, your comments should be tailored to, how what you want to address this issue and maybe other issues that have been proposed and will impact the counting of other marginalized communities in the US. And so it is important that, there are various forums and discussions about those other changes, but we're narrowed in on this specific issue, given our work and given our care for the well-being of the Black community.
And there are two more questions. One is why is OMB offering changes, and is another reason for undercounting due to incarceration?
I believe this is a standard review process in terms of this. So it's not something that is abnormal. I'm not exactly sure of the years that go that are between the review process, but it is a standard review process.
So the census in particular counts incarcerated people as residents where they are in prison, which is a whole it's a whole other issue that, a lot of people have spent a lot of time advocating for people to be counted in the actual neighborhoods and communities they live in. So in terms of, them not being counted at all, that's not necessarily, there's still potential undercounting with having that process done while you're incarcerated and caged. And therefore, people may not put their personal information and data in there. So that could be, certainly a category. I don't know those specific statistics and how that actually curbs participation, but it is just important to know where people that are within the carceral system are counted. They're counted where they're incarcerated, not where they actually live prior to incarceration.
Thank you. And to answer a couple of other questions I saw, we're going to try to have the video of this webinar available within the next couple of days, and all attendees for the Tuesday and the Thursday session will receive a copy. And also for any folks that joined late, this was a session to go over the OMB's race and ethnicity proposed changes, and then also a way to show people a step-by-step guide to submitting public comment. Dave, were there any other questions that we may have missed?
We got them all.
Thank you so much to everyone that was able to join us today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email us at info@mbcit.org. If you had any specific questions for any of our panelists, we can forward those questions to them. Again, a copy of this webinar will be made available and sent to you. Please go to mbcit.org/OMB to get the instructions on how to submit a public comment and to get the draft comment. And we just want to say thank you to everyone that joined us today. This is an important moment, and you took the time to spend this evening with us on a Thursday, and we're grateful for that. And we will be in touch soon. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.